Hey, welcome back to Slow Bells. It's less than a week before I leave on my Great Loop trip, so it's time to put the tools away and get the boat ready to move again. I thought I'd show you some of the projects I've been working on this winter.
One of my projects turned out to be the Westerbeek generator. I had been in Brunswick for a couple weeks when I decided that I would start up the generator to give it a little exercise. What I found is that I could hold down the starter button for as long as I wanted, and the generator would crank and crank and crank, but it would never fire up. There was nothing obvious to me that was wrong with the generator, so in this case, I had to bring in outside help. I called up All Power Pro, which is a diesel shop down in Fernandina Beach, Florida, and had them come out to look at it. They very quickly diagnosed the problem, and basically, this was the problem. There's something on my generator called a fuel shutoff solenoid. When you're ready to start the generator, this solenoid changes from here to here, and that opens up the flow of fuel into the generator's cylinders. When you get ready to shut off the generator, the solenoid moves from here to here, and that shuts off the flow of fuel to the cylinders. Dave from All Power Pro quickly figured out that the fuel shutoff solenoid was not moving. It turned out that there was nothing wrong with the solenoid. The problem was in this joint. Apparently, it had developed enough corrosion that it was preventing the solenoid from moving. All Dave did was put enough lubricant on the joint so that the solenoid could do its job. And once he did that, the generator started right up. There was a couple other minor things that Dave found with the generator that needed attention. The temperature gauge was not working, so Dave installed a new sensor, and that took care of that problem. Also, he found that I had a very small diesel leak where the glow plug is screwed into the block. He was able to pull out the glow plug and lubricate the threads a little bit and put it back in. That seemed to fix the fuel leak problem, and hopefully my generator will be happy for a long, long time.
There used to be an inverter right here. The original idea is that the inverter would be handy if I was at anchor so that I could plug in my blender and make a smoothie for breakfast. But the inverter got a lot more use than just the blender. It seemed like there was always things plugged into it. And as long as things were plugged into it, the cords would come from the inverter going up here somewhere, so you could never close this locker door because of the electrical cords. So I pulled out the inverter and I relocated it up here above the galley sink. I had to re-engineer this thing to make it a little bit shorter, but it fits in here pretty well now, and hopefully this will be a little bit better home for the inverter. Another boat project turned out to be this faucet. I installed this faucet about a year ago, I guess. I just got it at Home Depot. It worked pretty well at first, but over time the flow became gradually less and less and less until eventually there was like this much water coming out of it. It was still enough water to do dishes, but it was just crazy slow, and it was driving me crazy. When I originally installed the faucet, it came from Home Depot in about 1,000 different parts that had to be very carefully put together in a very particular order. So I was dreading the idea of going through all of those intricate little parts trying to figure out where the flow restriction was. However, it turned out to be a really easy fix, because in here there was a little wire screen filter that was restricting the flow, and it had a little bit of junk in the filter. So in true bachelor style, I threw away the filter, screwed everything back together, and now we got water. Check it out. Man, this is not looking very user-friendly this morning. Maybe instead of doing my walk, I'll show you a few more boat projects. I added this smart gauge from Balmar to give me a better idea of the health of my batteries. So this is telling me that the main house battery is down to about 12 volts. It'll also tell me the percentage of the charge, and it's telling me the battery's down to about 25%. Which is pretty low. What it does not tell me is the amperage that's happening at any particular moment. For that, I've still got to look up here at the old analog amperage dial. But the gauge will show me the engine battery voltage, 12.8. That's a little bit better. I think this will be a much more accurate way for me to judge the health of my batteries and let me know when I need to run my generator. And I think while I'm at this, I will just throw the the battery charger switch and give my batteries a drink of amps. Other electrical projects I did, for one thing, there used to be a very old small Garmin chart plotter here, but it was too old to be of any practical value, so I ripped it out. I did hang on to the depth sounder though. That seems to be working fairly well despite its age. One of the things I was interested in for a while now is the voltage at the alternators. So I added a couple voltage meters that are connected directly to the alternator. This was kind of a silly addition, but I was curious about it, and it'll be interesting to see how these voltages change over time as the engine's running. Inquiring minds want to know. Another change I made to my electrical system is that I added this little voltage display for my generator start battery.
Another project I took on was the VHF radio antennas. These antennas had been out in the sun for Lord knows how many years, and they were not aging gracefully. So I ripped out the antennas and the antenna holders and the coax cable and replaced it with all new stuff. But I didn't put the new antennas back in the same place where the old antennas had been mounted. And there were two reasons for this. Number one, I learned that with VHF antennas, you don't want to put two antennas right next to each other. There should be at least 2 or 3 feet separating the antennas, according to what I saw on the internet. So I located the new antennas well separated from each other. Another reason I relocated the antennas is because of the opening clear window panels on my upper deck enclosure. The old antennas had been located in such a place that it was clumsy and kind of difficult to open some of the upper deck window panels because you kept bumping into the antennas. So when I relocated the VHF antennas, I made sure that the antennas were in between the individual window panels. All of these changes were done on the starboard side. On the port side, there were also some antennas. There was a GPS antenna, which I didn't need anymore, so I got rid of that entirely. I also took out the VHF antenna on the port side, which was similarly corroded by UV radiation. I replaced that antenna with an AIS antenna, and I located this new AIS antenna in between two of the panels for my clear plastic windows on the upper deck. As you may have already guessed, I also added AIS to my boat. I used a NEMA 0183 network to send the AIS data to my chart plotter. I also used the NEMA 0183 network to send latitude longitude information from my chart plotter to my VHF radio, or at least one of the VHF radios. This will allow me to send out a DSC emergency message just by pressing the distress button on the VHF radio at the lower helm. And if you're not up on stuff like DSC and NMEA 0183 networks and AIS, I wasn't either. I had to learn most of that stuff over the winter, and I think in the weeks and months ahead, I'll try to squeeze in a couple videos to tell you what I learned about these topics. Another project was adding a rudder angle indicator at the upper helm. When you're maneuvering a boat at a slow speed or at no speed at all, it's really handy to know exactly where the rudder is. The biggest project for me was the installation of the forced air diesel heater. My boat already has a reverse cycle heater air conditioner, but in order to run it, you have to have either the generator going or you have to be hooked up to shore power. If you're at anchor with that generator running, it's pretty noisy in the main cabin. So I decided to try out this forced air diesel heater, which runs off of 12 volts. That'll be a lot quieter in the cabin while it's running, but of course after a while, if I was at anchor, I would still have to fire up the generator to recharge the batteries. Here's a peek inside the controller box that regulates the fuel flow and the flame inside the heater. This fuel pump and fuel filter and fuel shutoff valve were all located by me in a pretty exposed area of the lazarette, and I was concerned about accidentally throwing something in the lazarette that would damage some of these components. So I built a little lid to go over the components to give it a little bit more protection. Down in the engine room, I created a board with the necessary fuses and terminal strips to connect the heater to the 12-volt system. My little 1500 watt inverter also uses the same board. And, of course, I had to cut a gazillion holes through a gazillion bulkheads in order to get the hot air ducting from the heater back in the lazarette to the vent in the main cabin. And this is the thermostat that controls the forced air diesel heater.
the test. That's not too bad. I think I'm slowly getting better at this. I guess that completes the grand tour of the projects I've been working on this winter. I guess the next video should be northbound through Georgia on the ICW. Sounds exciting. Later. Oh yeah.